Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Feeling Loudly podcast. It has been months. Apologies for dropping off the face of the earth for a few months. I did that Pluto and Aquarius reading back in November and intended to come back like the following week. And then the world kept happening and life kept happening. So I promise my intention is to get more consistent and to bring back bi-monthly episodes or at least monthly episodes for this next stretch of time here to show up again. I've just been doing a lot in Discord. I've been doing a lot of like different types of media and ways to show up for community that feels more intimate and connective. And I just had to put the podcast on the back burner for a little bit. But my energy is restored and I feel excited to get back into it. So for those of you who are familiar with the structure of these episodes, this won't really be news to you, or maybe it will be. But the way that I typically structure episodes on this podcast is very loosey-goosey. And by that, I mean like there's a little bit of a structure, there's an infrastructure, then we really swim around within that. And that basically means that I pull 2 cards pretty much for every episode. I explore the themes that come up both through the tarot and through oracle cards that I pull on this show. And then I like to weave in music and literature and shufflemancy and different types of mediums for divination to bring you kind of holistic, interesting ways to connect to different archetypes, to different tarot cards, to different emotions. And that's really the bread and butter of this podcast and of the work that I do, is about intuitive and emotional connection. It's about stepping into our feeling world and using that as a tool, a compass to point us toward greater truth and healing and awareness that we can then bring with us into the rest of our lives. And so I share that to kind of level set, again, for those of you who are familiar but are maybe coming back with me after a few months being away from the podcast, as I've been. And for those of you who might be new completely to this podcast, my background as an astrologer and diviner is also very rooted in psychology. I studied psychology in college along with literature. And I've always been fascinated by human psychology and by the way that the mind works and the way that relationships work and dynamics between humans. And that has evolved a lot over the last several years as my thinking has become more decolonized and I've shifted away from my roots in many ways, but also come back to them just with kind of newfound perspective. Many of you might be aware that I'm pretty critical, or I guess I should say pretty skeptical, discerning when it comes to colonial mental health and our relationship to super individualized, individualistic mental health care. And that includes what I kind of referred to as the mental health industrial complex and the way that we've pathologized a lot of human nature. And so part of my goal with this podcast is to bring us back to a place of connection with ourselves, with our hearts, with our souls, with our emotions, to step away from more of the sort of clinical language and like therapy speak that has overtaken a lot of the internet in recent years. And that's partially a practice for myself too, as someone who has been very swept up in that world and that sort of ecosystem of like, let's slap a label and pathology onto everything that we feel and think and do. And so this podcast is sort of a labor of love and a personal project that helps me also gently step away from that and re-embrace the parts of myself and the parts of human nature and life that I feel often get disparaged or vilified or named as something bad or wrong. And so that means that on this show, we explore a lot of sticky stuff, a lot of material that feels maybe more confronting or vulnerable or scary. And the way that I do that is by weaving together, again, these divinatory messages, my own life experience, and whatever comes through, whatever my guides want to share with me and whatever your guides want to share with you. So that's a spiel and a reintroduction of sorts. Today, I'm excited to get back into this format. I've pulled a couple cards from my usual decks. And hey, I haven't really mentioned that I'm also on video today. Hi. So if you're watching this, welcome. I typically pull from two core decks, which are both by the creator Little Darkness. This is the Reclaim Oracle deck. This is an Oracle deck that features single emotions as each of the cards, or like human experiences. Trust, sadness, despair, rage. Like you'll get this really singular message and then a beautiful poetic description through the guidebook. And so I'll introduce you to this particular human experience through Reclaim. And then we'll round out that message with a tarot pull from Lilifer, which is also by Little Darkness. And this is a really gorgeous tarot deck, one of my favorites and one of my firsts. And I highly recommend checking out Little Darkness and supporting their work if you're curious and if this episode leads you down that path. I will also read you some lyrics from a song that I have pulled through Shufflemancy, and that'll be interesting. Like, full disclosure, I don't really plan these episodes. I could, but I don't, because I like to kind of follow the breadcrumbs and see where they lead us together. And so in that way, it becomes sort of this intuitive exploration or journey that we're on together. Some of that is just because that's how my brain works and I enjoy it. And some of it is because sitting down and planning an intuitive episode is a strange thing. We might pull from a book today to get an additional shufflemancy message or bibliomancy message. But I think we'll probably keep it simple and just get into it. Let's go. So our return episode, we're focusing on despair. And I'll hold the card up for those of you who are watching. So despair, we see this, what almost looks like a gust of wind or a wisp of wind, a figure that's shaped as if they're sort of like a snake, or they have this wispy quality to them that trails off and sort of looks like a ghost or a snake or a gust of wind. Like there's very sort of like wind-swept quality to it. And we see their face toward the bottom of the card. They're sort of upside down and they have their hands to their face and they look like they're in a lot of pain, emotional pain. Their hands are covering their cheeks and sort of supporting their head. And I'm also feeling this sense of what looks like kind of exhaustion or depletion coming from them. And that's it. It looks like their tail or the sort of, the wispy quality of their body is trailing off into the distance. And it gives me this sense that they've come from somewhere and now they're in front of us and they feel turned upside down. Their head is lower than the rest of their body or their figure. And it feels like they've come to rest in this place where there is this solemnness, this heaviness, this weight that feels painful. And so with that visual in mind, I'm going to read you the poetic description from the Reclaim Guidebook for Despair. Despair is lying still at the bottom of the ocean, heavy as an anchor with a head full of dreams. In those dreams, I reach for the surface and a wave takes me to shore. But the dreams never come true. I never see the surface. I never reach the shore. I am lying still in a great darkness and no one is coming. It's potent to me that dreams figure so prominently here, and the idea that there is something that could be seen and almost grasped, but ultimately isn't realized. And how that feeling of lost dreams or dashed hopes or a sunken vision is something that can absolutely just excruciatingly bring us into despair and hurt and deflatedness when something that we could almost wrap our hands around does not materialize, and we're left to be with the sunken feeling, to be in the sunken place. It's very painful when you can imagine something and taste it and almost touch it, but you can't actually reach it. And it is really that feeling that's probably familiar to most of us, where you wake up from a really amazing dream about something that you really deeply want, and then you come back to reality gradually and your eyes blink open and the dream fades away to the recesses of your mind and sort of stays in subconscious land, but you can still feel it. You can still feel the pleasure or the joy or the warmth or the possibility that came through from that dream. And if the world that you're waking up to doesn't match that beauty in your eyes, it doesn't match that beauty in your heart, if life doesn't align with the energy that you felt from that dream, it can feel so disappointing to wake up. And in this description of despair, they say, in those dreams, I reach for the surface and a wave takes me to shore, but the dreams never come true. I never see the surface. I never reach the shore. And so there's also this sense of relief and almost like salvation or rest, reprieve. Like, imagine if you've been swept out into the ocean and then you're deposited on the shore. That would be relieving. And this person or this figure that's speaking here is instead lying still at the bottom of the ocean, heavy as an anchor with a head full of dreams. It reminds me of how painful hope can be when hope attaches us to something that cannot be real. I wrote about this quite a bit in a recent article that I published on Substack for the Astrophile Substack. And I wrote it around the Venus North Node Neptune conjunction in Pisces, which was February 1st. And that was a big trio. The moon was actually involved too. And in that piece, I was exploring the sort of disenchantment and disillusionment and even despair that can come up with Pisces, especially when we have those players involved. And one of the things that I untangled a little bit was my definitions of shallow hope versus deep hope. And I'll link the piece down below if you want to read it. It's long, but I was proud of it, and you might get something from it if this resonates with you. The differences between shallow hope, which are often built on a really shaky dream or on something that is unstable or unrooted, and often is wrapped up in denial. Like, we hold out hope for a conclusion or an opening or an opportunity that is not rooted in reality. And instead of kind of bringing ourselves back to earth and experiencing the grief of a lost dream or our hopes being deflated, we keep feeding into this illusion that keeps us in a state of denial. And that ultimately can lead to a lot of despair, right? Like, when we keep feeding a cycle of denial, it leads to a lot of inner dissonance because parts of us inherently know that it's denial. We know that we're in denial deep down, but we keep feeding it. because it's too painful to accept what is. It's too painful to look at it, to be with it, to feel it, and to sort of surrender. And so that is my definition of shallow hope. And then it's contrasted by what I call deep hope, which is rooted. Deep hope acknowledges the current reality, and it also has the courage to hope for something more. And that courage is something that inspires action as opposed to complacency. It's the kind of hope that keeps your heart pumping, that keeps your eyes open, that keeps you open to change and open to possibility and faith and the belief that you can do it, the belief that you can do more, the belief that you can be more, and or even just be different. Like, deep hope is something that people need when they're recovering from addiction. The belief that they can change, the belief that they can be free. It's something that we need when we're leaving a relationship, when we're leaving a job or a home, and making these really big shifts in our life that require us to step out and take a risk and to dream of something different. And so that deep hope can act as the sort of, speaking of anchors, the sort of anchor that keeps us steady, whereas shallow hope can keep us stalled. And so one is like an expansive window and the other is more like a prison or like a barred window. We can see possibility, but we can't reach toward it. We fall into despair as a result. And despair itself is really common when we feel like we don't have agency, when we feel like we don't have power to change our circumstances or to step toward a dream or a hope or a wish or a fantasy that we really deep down desire. And so I bring in the hope piece of this conversation and this sort of side of despair because one is what perpetuates despair and the other is what helps lift us out of it. And this is a moment in history where despair is on the tips of many of our tongues, and people are talking about how to prevent despair, how to not fall into despair. And I think that distinction between rooted hope and unrooted hope is really important in this because we, as humans and as beings who are connected to one another, connected to the earth, we need to be rooted into some type of shared supply, or well is a better word for it, some type of shared well of hope in order for us to rise, in order for us to keep going and to resist. Because when we lose hope entirely, that's generally when we stop resisting. That's when we give up. We surrender, and not in a like acceptance way, but in a giving up way. That's when like we raise the white flag and we say, I'm done fighting. I'm falling into despair because it's not even worth it. It's not even worth it to fight. It's not worth it to pursue what I want or what we want collectively. And so in that piece that I mentioned, that Substack article, I offered some questions to sit with if you're trying to determine if you are feeding a denial cycle with shallow hope or if you're rooted in possibility with deep hope. So if that resonates with you, I'll leave that there as a little invitation to go check that out. But on the topic of despair itself, what do we do when we find ourselves at the bottom of the ocean, anchored to the ocean floor, and feeling unable to rise or unable to free ourselves from despair? Well, a lot of brilliant people have a lot of brilliant answers to that. And I might link a couple of extra resources and articles that I've read recently that have felt really inspiring to me. But today, our answer from the tarot is the Knight of Swords. So for those of you who are watching, I'm holding this up to the screen. And this Knight of Swords from the Lillifer Tarot is very dynamic. And of course, the knights in the tarot are dynamic naturally. They're in movement or in motion. They're moving towards something. Often they're on some type of journey. And they move in their own way based on their suit. They move at their own pace and with their own style, but they're all generally in motion. They're all traveling or on some type of quest or approaching some type of challenge. And so often the question that comes to mind for me with the knights is, how do you rise to the challenge? What is your style of rising? How do you rise? And so when we talk about despair, right, and being at the bottom of the ocean and feeling stuck and feeling immovable or hopeless, and then we see the Knight of Swords coming through, well, there's something here that has to do with the mind and has to do with the way that we move through a sea of information and slice through the bullshit, slice through the propaganda, the disinformation, the attempts to weigh us down and push us into despair, of which there are many right now. So many. It becomes kind of a war of the mind. It becomes a war or a battle against the forces that attempt to drag us into despair. And that's where we really have to take up our sword, metaphorical, and slice through and cut away what is not serving us, what is dragging us down, what is keeping us in that pit of hopelessness and preventing us from taking the action that we need to take. And so there's really a courage that comes through, like intellectual courage and discernment, which is not normally a keyword that I would associate with the Knight of Swords. Discernment. The Knight of Swords is often described as like kind of reckless and even like arrogant or ruthless sometimes. Someone who really is detached from their emotions and cuts with disregard for the harm that may be caused. And that's kind of Knight of Swords in its extreme, to be clear. Like Knight of Swords at a more grounded level, or at least like a less chopping level, can just be someone who's sharp and is quick and can toss around ideas and kind of move through them with a lot of speed and force, and can be sharp with their tongue, sharp with their words. And in this time when there's so much conflict, there's so much noise, and as many people have described it, we're here, especially, you know, I'm located in the United States, and so I'm speaking from that perspective, but this is not an issue that is solely rooted here in the US. We are being flooded by so much information, and that's intended to flood us. It's intended to overwhelm us to the point of incapacitating us, to the point that we're not capable of taking action because we're so consumed in a sea of endless information that is meant to swallow us whole, is meant to immobilize us, and is meant to defeat us. And weaponizing information in order to push people into despair is incredibly effective. Only, though, if you feed into that cycle by swallowing things whole without discernment, without boundaries, and without the willingness and the courage to say no or to turn away or to like seek other sources or seek information that contradicts what you're being presented with. A lot of us, if we've spent a lot of time on social media, are used to passive consumption, or even not, even if like you're, watching TV, like we're trained from a very young age to passively consume content and to not necessarily bring our discerning mind online when we are reading or listening or watching. And we become sort of those passive drones after a time when we're consuming information. And there's a level of implicit trust that people can develop, or if not trust, let's say like receptivity. Like we become receptive and sort of like fall into a meditative, receptive state, almost like we're being hypnotized when, say, you zone out and like watch something for hours, or like read something for hours, or listening to something for hours. And after a time, our minds just kind of become these sponges for whatever it is that we're intaking. And in some cases, that's actually really cool. Like I've been zoning out and reading a fantasy trilogy for a while. And I read it before I go to bed, and I very much get into that like receptive, sort of hypnotized state when I'm immersed in this other world. And that is great. I love that. I love fantasy. I love being able to get swallowed up by a story. But imagine then if that story is planted with seeds everywhere that are meant to shift my thinking in harmful ways. That then means that as I'm kind of tuning into something and zoning out, that I'm also receiving all of these subtle signals that are pointing me in a direction that is not good for me. And that's basically what's happening all the time when we're scrolling on social media or consuming news that is filtered and augmented or presented in a certain way that causes us to feel despair and a lack of agency and a lack of power. Some of you, a lot of you are probably familiar with, why am I spacing on their last name in this moment? Joe, Maker of Ways, who's an incredible astrologer and writer, and whose name I'm completely blanking on, which is annoying. But Joe published an article on Substack where they made this really gorgeous parallel between some through lines of Lord of the Rings and our cell phones. And I think it's called a palantir, which was like this device that they could look into, kind of like a crystal ball, where these leaders and like hypothetically good-natured, like heroic people could communicate with one another and show each other information. And how when those palantirs fell into the wrong hands, they became these tools of corruption, because you could obscure certain things and show other things. And so it became this sort of like war of omission, or lies by omission, where evil forces could augment what people were seeing and cause them to believe that there was no hope. It was a brilliant metaphor and parallel to what we're experiencing currently with the news cycles and with social, and especially like X and all of that bullshit. And a great read that I will also link below if you want to go look into that. I think it's like so potent to this conversation. And Joe offers some tips at the end of that article for detaching gently from meta platforms too. And so like that sort of that sort of parallel is exactly that, right? Like, again, you can sit and you can watch Lord of the Rings for hours. I'm actually probably going to do that this weekend because it's been a while. And you can absorb all of these metaphors and meaning. And like, Joe is someone who has been very deeply in love with that series for a long, long time. And it's like a big part of what they talk about publicly is Lord of the Rings and like their fascination with it and love for it. And I think they said in that article that they didn't pick up on that particular strand or that like comparison until their most recent rewatch, and that they've watched it like zillion of times. And then that finally came out. Like they finally caught that one strand that was like, oh my God, this is basically what we're experiencing right now. And so like that Lord of the Rings, right? This series that's been incredibly influential culturally and is so meaningful to so many people and has like a cult following. That's a series that's so rich with symbolism and meaning and depth and metaphors for our current times that you could watch it a million times and still probably pull out strands of insight that have resonance to where we currently are or have resonance to your personal life. And that's sort of the flip side, or like the beautiful possibility that exists when we zone out and absorb. And then again, the scary side of that is when a piece of work or something is intended to manipulate us into being submissive, into being passive and receptive to the point that we do not take action, we do not resist, and we basically lay down our sword and say, go ahead, do your worst, because like I already believe I've lost. And that's what we need to resist. That's the sort of despair that we need to resist, both at a personal level and also collectively in this moment. And so again, how do we be the Knight of Swords? Well, the keywords from the Lillifer guidebook: seizing opportunity, assertiveness, courage, rebellion, ambition, and leadership. Those are the upright keywords that they list. And then the reversed keywords are missed opportunity, arrogance, aggressiveness, forcefulness, impatience, and inferiority complex. And so there's something, we see the word opportunity here twice, right? There's first the seized opportunity, and then there's missed opportunity. And that's really rooting us back into those original messages from our little despair poem, or whatever you want to call it. The opportunity, the possibility, the opportunity that is there, we seize it or we miss it. We move toward it with some degree of courage, assertiveness, maybe rebellion, ambition, leadership. We pick up the sword and we go for it. Or we sit back and we say, it's never going to work out. I don't have the power. I don't have the knowledge. I don't have the courage. Like, there's so many stories you can tell yourself to wrap yourself up in a sort of like binding fear that keeps you from taking any steps forward and that keeps you completely immobilized. And we can see this at a personal level. I know I've done this so many times in the past where I was like, I'm not good enough, so I'm not even going to go for it. And then the fact that I lose out on that opportunity reinforces the belief that I'm not good enough, right? Like, there's so many situations where we might play out this dynamic just in our own lives. I've done this in relationships when I was like afraid to put myself out there. And so I never found out. I never discovered if like I could have had a great connection with someone, or if it could have been something really beautiful and magical, because I was too afraid to put my heart on the line, too afraid to put myself out there, too afraid of rejection or taking a risk or feeling vulnerable or humiliated or whatever. I've done this in work. I've done this with creative projects. Like, this used to be a real deep pattern for me, and it's something that I still come up against sometimes, is that sort of imposter syndrome or the inferiority complex that prevents me from taking any action and then again reinforces that belief that I'm unworthy in some way. And like I'm someone who doesn't really entertain a lot of regrets, so to speak, because I don't find it helpful. And I think I've talked about that on this podcast before. But one thing that I like harbor, not regret, I guess, but more what could have been with, I have that what could have been or this could have been amazing, was an opportunity that was offered to me by a classmate in college to take over his writing position as a music writer for LA Weekly. And it would have changed the course of my life. And like, for that reason, I don't harbor regret, because there are other things I would have missed out on that have been beautiful and enriching. And like, who knows what my life would look like had I chosen to do that after college instead of following the path that I did. I wouldn't have the people I have. I wouldn't have my dog, probably. Like, who knows? And so on some level, I'm like, that's fine. And on other levels, I'm like, what? To have gone to see incredible artists, to go to free shows and to write about them, to be able to experience music in that way and share the beauty and magic of music with other people through my writing would have been incredible. It would have been an amazing opportunity that probably would have had its downsides and all that stuff, and it wouldn't be perfect. But like, I sometimes look back at that and I remember how much I dropped the ball because I was just afraid that I wasn't good enough. I didn't think I was a good enough writer. I didn't think that I was skilled enough or like self-guided enough to do this sort of work for this type of publication, which is a big publication in LA. And I just didn't respond. I just dropped it. I didn't respond. I basically ghosted. And I felt horrible about it after. I think I waited until the deadline passed and then I was like, oh my God, I forgot. And I didn't. I was thinking about it. I was dreaming of it. I was wishing on it. And at the same time, I was completely sabotaging and not allowing myself to just do the thing and take the risk for fear that I would not be good enough. And there are similar things that have come up again with like love. Like there are people who I never told how I felt because I was worried they didn't feel the same way. There are people like who I wanted to even just be friends with or to connect with professionally who I didn't reach out to because I was afraid that I was not worthy. And that sort of like personal rejection, when we reject ourselves and we don't allow ourselves to chase our dreams, can become a pattern that again reinforces those beliefs and keeps us stuck in a cycle of non-doing. And when we zoom out and we multiply that and we start to think about these bigger issues, like the way that we confront power, the way that we confront oppression, the way that we resist together, if we all get into this belief that we are incapable or unworthy or not powerful enough to create the change that we want to see, then we don't do the thing. And that's why so many organizers and activists and like inspirational humans advocate for doing small things, like going and helping to like hand out cans of food, or volunteering at a local mutual aid network, or distributing zines, or doing something, just something, refilling your local like community fridge, or doing something, passing out water bottles, like small, little, seemingly small, but the things that can really change someone's day and even someone's life. Those actions mean something, and they also show us at a personal level that we are capable of doing something. We are capable of taking action. We're capable of just getting up and doing the thing instead of thinking it to death and thinking it to death. And again, like tightening those binds of fear that we've wrapped around ourselves, or maybe that were wrapped around us. And so I think the message that's coming through pretty clearly from this exploration today is that resisting despair means doing something. It means learning how to hold the possibility of both success and failure within us, and to take the action anyway, to do the thing, to answer the question, to move out of a state of sort of like paralyzing insecurity and immobilizing fear and terror of the unknown, terror of failure, terror of rejection, and to go toward the thing, to do it, to do the thing. And that sometimes requires that we step into Knight of Swords energy, where it's like, I might have to put my feelings, my fears in the back seat here and just step forward with my sword and like pick it up and do it. Send the message, go out there and do the volunteering or pitching in or whatever it is. Like, just do the thing and put your mind in the back seat for a little bit while you commit to taking some type of action. And that doesn't mean drop discernment and like make reckless choices. It just means like put the hyper obsessive thinking, more compulsive, fearful mind in the back seat so you can do something. You can always come back to your fears later. They will surely be waiting there for you, but you don't have to let them guide you. You don't have to put them in the driver's seat. And so often we get used to doing that. We get stuck with fear driving and making these decisions for us that veer us off course, that cause us to panic, that cause us to stop before we start seeing progress because we're so afraid of what progress might entail. We're so afraid of what it might mean even to succeed, perhaps. And so we cut ourselves off. We like veer off course, or we just stop ourselves from ever beginning in the first place. And those are the things, those parts of ourselves are the parts that really need our attention and our presence, but also our sort of like solid, sturdy, disciplining hand to set those aside so that we can do some shit. We need to not let those parts of ourselves run the show anymore. And that's so important, again, personally and collectively. It's so important that we learn to identify when that part of ourselves is running the show and making our decisions for us. And also, when that comes up, what outside influences are contributing to that? Are we feeding into cycles of despair with the information that we're consuming? Are we reading shit that just places us into that despairing mind and that despairing place because it somehow feels safer to be there? Because then if we've already lost, then we don't have to try and we don't have to fail. Like, what's going on there? And can we interrupt that cycle by being conscious? Poppy. Can we interrupt that cycle by being conscious of what we're taking in and how that's molding the way that we respond to the world? Okay. The final message I want to explore here is from the songs, from the music. And I did shufflemancy as usual. I picked a playlist, my like songs, and enabled shuffled and hit play. And the song that we got is Time of the Season by the Zombies. I love this song. What a classic. And it's so funny. I saw someone post about this online recently, and they were like, wow, what a badass line. What's your name? Who's your daddy? Is he rich like me? It is funny also when you actually see photos of the zombies and they're just like these little white guys from back in the day who did not look like they would craft this song. But I love the song. The Zombies. I'll read through the lyrics and then we'll untangle a couple threads here and then we will say goodbye for today. So it starts off, it's the time of the season when love runs high. In this time, give it to me easy and let me try with pleasured hands to take you in the sun to promised lands, to show you everyone. It's the time of the season for loving. What's your name? Who's your daddy? Is he rich like me? Has he taken any time to show you what you need to live? Tell it to me slowly. Tell you why. I really want to know. It's the time of the season for loving. And then it repeats. And so kind of like a little coming from left field here in some ways, but in other ways, I think it's really on point. Like, first, the notion that it's the time of the season. We start off with this concept of time, like it is now. It's the time of the season when love runs high. In this time, give it to me easy and let me try with pleasured hands to take you in the sun to promised lands, to show you everyone. It's the time of the season for loving. And so there is a sort of like, there's presence to it, right? Like in the sun to promised lands, pleasured hands, like these notes of pleasure and presence and doing the thing. Let me take you there. Let me take you to the sun. Take you in the sun to promised lands and show you. And they're saying, like, very sort of matter of factly, the time to love is now. And when love runs high, give it to me easy and let me try with pleasured hands. And so there is a sort of like assertiveness to this, and also the sort of like swag that comes in where they're like, who's your daddy? Is he rich like me? Like there is a sort of like swag or even a little bit of arrogance or like a challenge of sorts that comes up here that's kind of delicious. Like it's kind of hot. It's a little like, oh, okay, you're just going to like show yourself to me in that way and kind of step out and say it and challenge a little bit. And so that sort of rebellious Knight of Swords energy, I think, comes through really clearly in the song, actually. There's a flirtatious quality to it. There's a sort of like putting myself out there and just saying like, hey, here's what I can show you. Here's what I can give you. And like, are you going to take it? It's the time for loving. Let's do it. Let's go in the sun. Let's go to the promised lands. Like there is this implicit sort of like confidence that comes through from it. And that's like when I saw that post on social, these people were like, wow, like what a line. Because it's like the kind of thing that someone comes up to you and you like laugh or smirk a little bit, but you're also like, whoa, that was kind of hot. Like you just said the thing, you just did the thing, you just pulled the trigger and did it. And so that feels like the sort of embodiment of the energy that the Knight of Swords is asking us to step into here, is to like, to try, to do the thing, to just take a risk and to put ourselves out there and actually step forward with some gumption and confidence and courage and just see what happens. And often you'll notice, if this is something you've done before in relationships or work or whatever, that when you put yourself out there with that kind of like swag and courage and confidence, that people respond in kind to that. And that people receive you very differently. When you put yourself out there and you just do it, often people will step up and be like, I do actually want to join you in that, or I do actually want to get to know you better, or I want to see what you can do because you've got me curious. And so as we part today, maybe go listen to Time of the Season and maybe go watch the zombies perform the song. Try like embodying that energy. Try moving into that Knight of Swords swag a little bit, and maybe take a risk on yourself this week or next week or whenever. Take a risk. Put yourself out there. Do something that feels a little bit challenging and scary, and step into the role of the you who believes that you can deliver on what you have to say. And see how that lifts you potentially out of a state of being anchored to the bottom of the ocean, where you feel powerlessness, where you feel like you don't have the agency. That sort of remedy, the just do it, swooping Nike, whatever, that sort of approach can really lift us out of some deep places where we feel sunken, where we feel incapable. And it often just takes us proving to ourselves that we can do it. Thank you for listening. As always, if you want to support this podcast or if you want to engage with my work more, I highly recommend joining me on Patreon. I have like 5 tiers now, or is it even 6 tiers maybe? There's a podcast tier where you can get access to my bi-monthly new moon and full moon readings. They're audio readings that come out twice a month on the new and full moon. They feature really rich descriptions of that particular lunar cycle with reflection prompts and invitations and sometimes rituals for you to work with the lunar energy. And those audio readings also feature a tarot reading for my patrons. And it's like covers the anchor energy for the month or for the lunar cycle, the challenge, the gift that's available to us, and opportunities, speaking of opportunities that we can seize to really expand and to grow and to learn throughout that particular cycle. So that is available for $4 a month. You also get access to a monthly AMA episode where you can submit a question and I will answer it once a month at the beginning of the month. And so you can like ask a personal question and get a mini tarot reading. You can ask a collective question or ask for like information about my practice or my specialties. And that's all for $4 a month. And it's a great way to support this podcast if you enjoy what I do and just my work in general. I also now introduced a Discord tier that you can use to get immediate access to my Discord server, which is a really delicious and cozy and supportive place on the internet. That is just $2 a month. And so you can join if you want to get access to private channels in Discord and just support my admin work and what is generally a free space. And then I also have higher tiers starting at $9 a month is the sun tier, which gets you access to a monthly tarot scope for every single zodiac season. And that also features a pick a card reading with more personalized predictions to help guide you through the season. People find them really supportive and really accurate. And it's again, a really great way to get divination support and spiritual support every single month. Also, what else? They get an extra pick a card every quarter that they get to vote on. And at my moon tier, higher than that, you get access to our monthly group readings where you can practice divining and channeling for other people and get mentorship from me. So if you're interested in boosting your divination skills and your psychic and intuitive skills, that's an incredible way to do it for just $17 a month. And they get all those prior perks and then also the access to the group reading. And then rising tier gets a personal tarot reading every single month, delivered as an audio reading with predictions and guidance for the month ahead. And then I just introduced a totally new tier called Mercury, which also features a monthly session that's called High Tea, where I chat with you back and forth. I think we're going to do it on Patreon. We might do it on Discord. Where you can ask questions and I'll pull cards for you live and I'll type up responses. And so it's an awesome way to like chit chat and get really in the moment support and have an interaction with me and get that sort of personalized attention that you need if you're looking to untangle a complicated issue or to sort something out or kind of find your next steps. And those will be hosted every month. And so you'll get this more one-on-one support in that way, but in a group setting still. All of my planetary tiers also get discounts on one-on-one readings with me. So they get 10% at sun, 20% at moon, 30% at rising and Mercury. So it's an awesome way to engage with my work more deeply and to get a lot of support. And I highly recommend joining us over there. Okay, that's the end of my very long spiel. I'm wishing you all lots of courage and support as you head forward, and I will talk to you soon.